10 years ago, I met a man crying by a pile of rocks. I had already decided that I disapproved of him. We had both undertaken a pilgrimage voluntarily to the shrine, on the Camino de Santiago, to the shrine of St. James. In the 9th century, it was reported that the tomb of the apostle St. James had been discovered in northwest Spain. And for over 1,000 years now, pilgrims have been making their way to that shrine in faith, expectation, and wonder. Gosh, it hasn't always been that way. Well, nowadays, we're virtually indistinguishable on the trail. We all wear the same sort of trail shoes, Nikes or New Balance. We all have the same sort of hats from Columbia or Tilly. Windbreakers are from North Face. There's a cheap pair of flip-flops tied to your backpack that says Osprey or Gregory, or Quechua if you're German. In the distance, it's even hard to tell gender in the unisex uniform of the walking pilgrim. That stranger who I saw crying and I would have insisted that we were equals. Gosh, it hasn't always been that way. Centuries ago, pilgrims only had one pair of clothes, and it had to last them the round trip, not the choices of now. There are differences, however, even on the Camino de Santiago. Long-distance walkers commit themselves to a journey that's 500 miles or further, and they wear their weathered look with pride. They look down on the short-distance walkers who do the minimum 65 miles or so to get their certificate from the cathedral. All the walkers look down at the bikers. And this guy was a cyclist. I had started over 300 miles earlier and on foot. And yet, he was a pilgrim like me, and that should have been enough for me to indulge him without seeing him cry. I was failing to see the quest in the guest. William and Mary has the world's only Institute for Pilgrimage Studies. And, aw shucks, I'm the founder. We study pilgrimage in every time, territory, and tradition. There are over 25 faculty on this campus that look and examine and research why and how people undertake pilgrimage and what moves them. What are the motivations? What drives them? What leads them on? Yes, we study traditional pilgrimage to medieval shrine sites, but also pilgrimage to modern sites like Rome and Jerusalem and Mecca. We look at religious tourism, but we also look at patriotic pilgrimage. If you visit Ground Zero in New York, or the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C., or Colonial Williamsburg, aren't you on a pilgrimage too? Aren't you on a search for transcendent values and to connect with the people who represent those values, that embody those values? Doesn't that count as a pilgrimage too? And what about the folks who offer hospitality? The people who welcome and shelter and give a listening ear and compassion to travelers on a sacred journey. Aren't they beneficiaries as well when they listen for the quest in the guest? Every year, tens of millions of Americans undertake a journey for reasons of transcendent spirituality, of powerful meaning, of emotional contact that are valuable to them and many times for those around them. Nowadays, with the possibility for new mobilities and new forms of transportation, almost everyone around the planet who has wanted to make a pilgrimage can, either to a shrine site in a neighboring village or to a mountaintop in a foreign country. That too is pilgrimage, and over 440 million people on this planet make such a journey every year. I met that guy the previous night in a pilgrim shelter. We had spent the night there, and me, with my relentless good cheer, was bouncing around, pleasantries, asking questions. How did it go for you? This guy had a hefty laptop and was blogging and blogging, resistant to any human approach. At some point, I decided he didn't need us. And frankly, I didn't need him. Who goes on pilgrimage? Virtually everyone. And despite its religious overtones, pilgrimage has always been a poor vehicle for indoctrination. It's not a good way to impose dogma. Why? Because walking pilgrims sharing a journey entertain themselves. They talk to each other. They air their concerns and burdens and fears. And their values gradually converge. They tell stories. They tell jokes. They reveal secrets to strangers. Who goes on pilgrimage these days on the Camino de Santiago? Everything from industrial strength Catholics to mainline denominations to bearers of aromas, crystals, and grudges against their former churches. There are even people who are pissed at God for not existing. And shouldn't we accept them all as pilgrims? When I approached that man and I couldn't get a response, frankly, he irritated me. Why couldn't he join in the conversations of our entire group gathered in that Pilgrim's Refuge? Why couldn't he too share our pleasantries about the break in the weather, about the long uphill climb, about the poor food choices here in the highlands? He just kept blogging and blogging. Look, he was middle-aged like me. A guy, English rather than American, perhaps a professional to judge from his expensive gear. How could he resist my charm? How could he resist the neediness of many of those around us? It was worse. He was an Anglican priest, and I am a former Franciscan brother, still in love with my faith tradition and my faith community. Why couldn't we leap onto common ground? I got my answer by a pile of stones. The topographical high point of the Camino de Santiago stands just under 5,000 feet in elevation. For over 2,000 years, those who passed by and cleared the summit as a rite of passage would take a stone and throw it off the trail onto a heap. That heap is now yards high and yards wide. The old Roman road is gone. So is the medieval cart path. There's a small, rough-hewn asphalt country road that snakes past this huge pile of stones, now with a single iron cross on top. Every summer, mini bulldozers show up to push the loose stones back onto the pile and off the roadway. Christians in the Middle Ages reinterpreted the gesture and made it their own. They carried a stone, often from their home, all the way to this high point at the Iron Cross. It symbolized their sins and their burdens, and throwing it away, placing it at the foot of a cross, allowed them to complete their journey lighter and relieved. This time, when I approached that man crying by a pile of rocks, I sat down next to him. The bicycle was parked 100 yards away, the laptop buried in the panniers. He revealed to me that his only son, at age 22, had died of cancer, never having made the Camino de Santiago as he had hoped. This priest's parishioners consoled him as best they could. And then they commissioned him in his son's name, in their names, to do the Camino de Santiago for them. And so he carried that online community with him for every mile that he biked through England, and then France, and now Spain. And in some pilgrim shelter, he would settle in and open up his laptop and write to them, sharing every mile of sorrow and healing. I sat next to him, and finally, we did bridge communities. He joined my community of walkers, and in a small way, I joined his community of online grief and healing. As church attendance in Western society has gone down, pilgrimage has gone up. It's ballooned, it's exploded. Over 440 million people a year are in motion, seeking transcendence, seeking connection with values that they hold not just as spiritual beings, but perhaps even as citizens. In the United States, a place where we don't talk about pilgrimage because it seems so odd and not secular, we seek our historic identity in Civil War battle sites, along the Trail of Tears, in the newly reimagined Underground Railroad. Aren't we too on pilgrimage? The Institute for Pilgrimage Studies here at William and Mary every year shows and exercises its leadership in travel for transformation. We have a national and now international reputation, known and respected in Canada, in Ireland, in Scotland, in England, in Norway, Sweden and Finland, in the Netherlands, Germany, France, Italy, Spain and Portugal, in Serbia and Mexico, on to Israel, India, Indonesia, the Philippines. Every year, we host a symposium on pilgrimage studies here at William and Mary, and scholars from across the world come to speak to each other and ask each other the big question. And the big question is this: how do we access, honor, and preserve in its dignity the shrine sites and sites of communal memory to which we think it's important to make a pilgrimage? How do we forestall the Disneyfication of the sacred? I get pushback. This is a state university, after all. What are we doing with the Institute for Pilgrimage Studies? On the contrary, as an institution without religious ties, with no filter in place, we are the common ground, the table that welcomes everyone to conversations about spirituality, whether you feel fully affiliated with a religious tradition, or adrift, or still seeking, or willing to listen to others. We live in an age of resentment for American military might across the planet and commercialization. We can offer a model now about respect for spirituality in a common conversation. And if you're really lucky, someday you will sit down by a pile of stones with a stranger and cry. Thank you.